The gray sky of Chicago weighed on Nathaniel Carter's shoulders like a leaden cloak. From the heights of his 40th floor office, he gazed at the city through the bulletproof windows, but his eyes were lost somewhere distant among the skyscrapers. The numbers on his screen flashed insistently, but for the first time in years they failed to capture his full attention. Nathaniel adjusted his custom-made Italian tie, an automatic gesture he repeated whenever he felt uneasy. At 45, he had built an empire from scratch, turning a small construction company into one of the largest real estate developers in the country. His sharp, always clean-shaven face graced business magazines, and his name was synonymous with success. But that morning, something felt different. Victoria, his assistant of over a decade, entered the room holding a folder of documents. "Mr. Carter, the paperwork for the land acquisition in the East Side is ready for your signature." The owner accepted the offer. He picked up the gold pen, a gift from his first major deal, and signed the documents without hesitation. It was another victory, another plot of land acquired for his luxury developments. But instead of the usual satisfaction, he only felt a familiar emptiness. "I need to see the site in person," he announced, surprising his assistant. Nathaniel never visited locations himself, preferring to send subordinates. "Cancel my afternoon. Appointments?" The driver dropped him off in front of a narrow, poorly maintained street. Nathaniel stepped out of the imported car, his Italian shoes touching the uneven asphalt. The contrast between his imposing figure and the decaying surroundings was stark. The old houses, many abandoned, told silent stories of a time when this neighborhood had life. As he walked along the cracked sidewalk, something drew him to one of the houses. It was an old structure with peeling paint and dusty windows. An inexplicable feeling made him stop in front of the rusted gate. For a moment he hesitated. His impeccable suit didn't belong in this place of neglect, but something stronger than his usual caution pushed him forward. The garden was overgrown with tall weeds, and dry leaves covered what must have once been a pleasant porch. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. Nathaniel pushed it open slowly, stepping into a space that seemed frozen in time. The smell of mold and abandonment filled his nostrils. The dust danced in the beams of light that slipped through the cracks of the closed windows. Furniture covered in dusty sheets cast ghostly shapes in the dimness. His footsteps echoed across the wooden floor, which creaked with every step. Then he heard it. A sound so faint it might have been just his imagination. But something inside him knew he wasn't alone in that house. He moved down the hallway, passing paintings draped in cobwebs, until he reached a half-open door. When he opened it, his heart nearly stopped. There, curled up in a corner of what must have once been a child's room, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 10. Her dark hair was tangled and dirty, her clothes worn and stained, but it was her eyes that hit him like a punch to the gut. They were large and dark, filled with a sadness no child should ever know. The girl didn't scream or try to run. She just stared at him with unsettling intensity, as if she could see right through him. Nathaniel, who negotiated millions without blinking, felt inexplicably exposed under that gaze. What's your name?" His voice came out rougher than usual. "Sophia," she answered in a whisper so quiet it was almost inaudible. Her voice sounded rusty from disuse. "Where are your parents?" A heavy silence followed his question. Sophia kept staring at him, and for a moment, Nathaniel thought he saw something familiar in those eyes, something that unsettled him deeply. "Mama said she'd come back," she finally replied, her voice even softer, "but that was a long time ago." Nathaniel felt something break inside him. Those simple words carried a weight he knew all too well. Memories he'd buried long ago began to stir in his mind, like dry leaves kicked up by an unwelcome wind. "How long have you been here?" Sophia shrugged, a gesture so adult it seemed out of place in her childlike frame. "The days all blend together," she said, and once again Nathaniel felt that unsettling sense that there was something more to this child, something he couldn't quite grasp. He pulled his phone from his pocket, ready to call the authorities, to resolve the situation in the most practical way possible, just as he always did. But as his fingers hovered over the numbers, something stopped him. Sophia's eyes followed him, and in them was a knowingness that unnerved him. "You know what it's like too," she said, her words dropping like stones in the silence of the house. "Waiting for someone who isn't coming back." Nathaniel felt his hands tremble. How could this child know? How could she touch wounds he had buried so deeply? He slipped the phone back into his pocket without making the call. "Come with me." The words left his mouth before he could think. "I'll take you somewhere safe." Sophia rose slowly, her movements cautious like a wild animal's. When she took his hand, a shiver ran down Nathaniel's spine. Her hand was ice cold, but there was something else in that touch, something that made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. As he led her out of the house, Nathaniel didn't know that this moment would change his life forever. He didn't know that this abandoned child carried with her the keys to doors he had locked in his heart long ago. And he certainly didn't know that in trying to save her, he was beginning a journey that would force him to face his own demons. Nathaniel's car glided silently through the streets of Chicago, creating a surreal contrast between the luxury of the vehicle's interior and Sophia's fragile figure in the back seat. Through the rearview mirror, he watched her discreetly. The girl kept her eyes fixed on the window, as if memorizing every detail of the path. "Mr. Carter," the driver's voice broke the heavy silence, "where should I take you?" Nathaniel hesitated. The logical answer would be the police station, or a shelter for minors, but something held him back. Sophia's eyes met his in the mirror, and that unsettling feeling washed over him again. "Home, Michael," he finally answered, surprising even himself. The Carter mansion loomed impressively after 40 minutes of driving. The wrought iron gate swung open automatically, revealing a meticulously manicured garden. Sophia watched everything with an expression that mixed curiosity and something deeper, something Nathaniel couldn't decipher. Margaret, the housekeeper who had worked for him for 15 years, waited at the front door. Her round, usually welcoming, face showed shock at the sight of the dirty, ragged girl stepping out of the car. "Margaret," Nathaniel called with an authority he didn't feel, "prepare a hot bath and set out some clean clothes, and then bring her something to eat." The housekeeper nodded, still dazed, and reached out for Sophia. The girl, however, didn't move. Her eyes remained fixed on Nathaniel, as if she feared he would disappear the moment she looked away. "It's all right," he heard himself say, his voice softer than usual. "Margaret will take care of you. I'll be in my office." The following hours were a blur of phone calls and ignored messages. Nathaniel tried to focus on work, but his mind kept returning to the girl. What was he doing? Why hadn't he just handed her over to the authorities? It was the proper procedure, the logical path. But ever since he'd found Sophia, nothing seemed to follow logic. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Margaret entered, her face a mask of worry. "Mr. Nathaniel," she began, twisting her apron in her hands. "The girl, she looks different now that she's bathed and eaten, but she says strange things, sir, things she shouldn't know." Nathaniel felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of things?" "She mentioned your mother, sir. Talked about how she used to sing you to sleep, that Italian lullaby." The blood froze in his veins. No one knew about that, not even Margaret, who had worked for him for so long. It was a memory he had buried so deep that sometimes he doubted if it was real. "Where? Here's she now." "In the library, sir." She went straight there as if she knew the way. Nathaniel stood abruptly, his heart hammering in his chest. He hurried through the mansion's hallways with quick steps until he reached the library. The door was slightly ajar, and through it, he could see Sophia sitting in her favorite armchair, flipping through an old book. When he entered, she looked up. Clean and in fresh clothes, she seemed like a different child, but that gaze, that unsettling intensity remained the same. "How did you know?" he asked bluntly. "About the song my mother used to sing." "You still dream of her sometimes?" Sophia replied, her voice soft but clear. "When the weight becomes too heavy to carry alone." Nathaniel felt his legs weaken. He sank into the armchair opposite her, staring at this child who seemed to hold too many secrets for her small frame. "Who are you really, Sophia?" The girl closed the book gently, her fingers tracing the worn cover. Someone who understands. Your pain, she answered, an ancient sadness in her voice, just as you understand mine. What are you talking about? Loneliness, she said simply. Waiting for people who never return. Building walls so high no one can climb them. Every word was like a needle piercing Nathaniel's heart. Memories he had suppressed for years began to surface, his mother wasting away in a hospital bed while he was too busy closing deals to visit her, his father dying alone while he attended an important meeting overseas. Stop, he whispered. But Sophia continued. You built all this, she gestured to the mansion around them, so you wouldn't have to feel, so you wouldn't have to remember. But the walls aren't thick enough to muffle the screams of your heart. Nathaniel stood abruptly, walking to the window. His reflection in the glass showed a pale, troubled man, so different from the controlled image he usually projected. How can you know all these things? Because I also know what it's like to lose everything, she replied. Mama built walls too, but hers were made of absence. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken meaning. Nathaniel kept his back to her, struggling to regain control of his emotions. When he finally turned, Sophia watched him with a mix of compassion and sorrow that seemed too ancient for her youthful face. You can't stay here, he said, more to himself than to her. It isn't right. You told them the same thing, Sophia answered, and again Nathaniel felt that blow to his chest. When they needed you, that it wasn't the right time, that there were more important things. The words hit him like a punch. Memories of his parents' final moments flooded his mind. Missed calls, postponed visits, broken promises, all in the name of success, of the empire he'd built. Why are you doing this to me? His voice trembled. Because sometimes we need to face our wounds to heal them, she replied, rising from the armchair, and you've been running from yours for far too long. At that moment, watching the small figure who seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders, Nathaniel felt something break inside him, a crack in his carefully constructed armor, the first sign that the walls he'd built over the years weren't as impenetrable as he'd thought. Night fell outside, plunging the library into deep shadows, but Sophia's eyes glowed in the dim light, like beacons guiding a lost ship back to harbor. And for the first time in many years, Nathaniel Carter allowed himself to feel the weight of everything he had buried in his heart. Sophia's first night in the mansion was marked by screams that shattered the silence of the early hours. Nathaniel woke with a start, his heart racing, and rushed to the guest room where the girl was sleeping. He found her curled up on the king-sized bed, which seemed to swallow her in its vastness, her wide eyes fixed on an invisible spot on the wall. Sophia, he called, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. They always come back, she murmured, her voice trembling. The nightmares. Like yours. A chill ran down Nathaniel's spine. How could she know about his own nightmares? The ones that haunted him on lonely nights, when the silence of the mansion became deafening. Margaret appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her floral robe, her face lined with worry. I'll make some chamomile tea, she said, already turning to leave. No, Sophia's voice was louder this time. Just like your mother used. To make for you, right, Nathaniel? With honey and a pinch of cinnamon. The businessman felt his legs weaken. That was exactly how his mother had prepared the tea when he had nightmares as a child. Our detail so intimate, so personal that he had never shared it with anyone. Margaret looked back and forth between them, confused. Nathaniel gestured for her to leave, and the housekeeper reluctantly stepped out, closing the door softly behind her. How do you know these things? He asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Who told you about my mother? Sophia finally tore her gaze from the wall, her eyes meeting his. No one told me. I just know. Just like I know you still catch the scent of her perfume sometimes when you walk through the rose garden. I know you keep your father's last letter in the desk drawer, but never had the courage to open it. Nathaniel felt the air leave his lungs. It was true. All of it was true. The letter was there, yellowed with time, the seal still unbroken. It had arrived 3 days after his father's funeral, when he was already buried in another $1 million project, trying to drown his guilt in work. You can't possibly know these things, he said, more to himself than to her. It's impossible. Impossible. Fear's pretending you don't feel pain, Sophia replied, her voice taking on that unsettling maturity, like you've done all these years. A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, the city never truly slept, but its noises seemed distant, as if this room existed in its own dimension, one where only painful truths were allowed to exist. My mother, Sophia began, her voice softer now. She built walls too. After Dad died, she started pulling away. First it was small things, a missed dinner, a forgotten bedtime story, then whole days until one day she just didn't come back. Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. Her story mirrored his own in a disturbing way. He too had pulled away, little by little, building his empire on the foundation of abandoned relationships and broken promises. She said she was going to buy bread. Sophia continued, fiddling with the edge of the silk sheet. I waited, first for hours, then days. The neighbors started bringing food, but I couldn't leave. She told me to wait. How long were you alone? Time is different when you're waiting, she answered, her eyes drifting to some distant point again. As you know well, how many times did you stare at the phone waiting for the call from the hospital? How many times did you promise you'd visit your parents on the weekend knowing you wouldn't? Every word was like a knife twisting in his chest. Nathaniel stood abruptly, walking to the window. The city glittered below, millions of lights, flickering like fallen stars, his empire of concrete and glass built on a foundation of absences. Why are you doing this? He asked, his voice hoarse. Why are you forcing me to remember these things? Because some wounds need to be cleaned before they can heal, she replied. And yours have been infected for so long, you've forgotten what it's like not to feel pain. Nathaniel turned to face her. In the dark, her eyes seemed to glow with an ancient wisdom, as if through them he could see all the truths he'd tried to bury over the years. And your wounds, Sophia? Who will heal them? A sad smile played on the girl's lips. Maybe that's why we found each other. Some people meet to share joys, others to share their pain until it becomes lighter. At that moment, something shifted in the air between them. A silent understanding, a mutual recognition of wounded souls that in some inexplicable way had been placed in each other's path. Lie down with me, she asked, her voice returning to that of a frightened child. Like your mother used to when you had nightmares. Nathaniel hesitated only for a moment before sitting on the bed beside her. Sophia curled up against him, her small hand searching for his in the dark. And there, in the silence of the night, two lonely souls found a moment of peace, however, temporary. But as Sophia finally drifted off to sleep, Nathaniel remained awake, his mind spinning with unanswered questions. How could that little girl know so much about him? Why did every word of hers seem to touch wounds he'd hidden so deeply? And most importantly, what would happen when he finally had to face all the truths she was bringing to light? Dawn was breaking by the time he finally slept, but his dreams were filled with long-forgotten memories and a child's voice that seemed to know every secret of his wounded heart. The days that followed brought an odd routine to the Carter mansion. Nathaniel, for the first time in years, began working from home. His office, once a sanctuary of solitude and numbers, now often received silent visits from Sophia, who would sit in a corner with a book, her eyes occasionally meeting his with that unsettling intensity. Margaret observed the changes with a mix of concern and fascination. The boss, always so controlled and distant, now seemed more human, more vulnerable. Sometimes she caught him looking at Sophia with pure bewilderment, as if he couldn't believe she was there. One particularly grey morning, as Nathaniel reviewed some contracts, Sophia looked up from her book and said without preamble, "You should visit their grave." The businessman froze, his pen halting mid-signature. "What did you say?" "Your parents," she continued, closing the book gently. "You've never been to the cemetery since the funerals. You're afraid of what they'd say if they could speak." Nathaniel felt his throat tighten. It was true. Since the rushed funerals, squeezed between meetings, he had never returned to visit his parents' graves. Guilt was a constant companion, but it was easier to drown it in work than to face it. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. "I do," she replied, standing and walking to his desk. "Just like I know you keep all their photographs in a box in the attic because you can't bear to see them on the walls. Like I know you still have your father's watch but never wear it because it reminds you of the time you didn't give him." Nathaniel pushed his chair back abruptly, standing up. "Enough. How could you possibly know all these things? Who told you?" "The walls of this house speak," she answered simply. "They hold memories, just like you. The difference is they don't try to pretend they don't hurt." He began pacing the office, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "This doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. You're just a child. You shouldn't know so much," she added. "How could you not know that your father cried every night after you cancelled the last Christmas he was alive? How could you not know your mother kept every newspaper clipping about you, even when you no longer had time to visit her?" The words hit him like physical blows. Nathaniel felt his legs weaken and had to lean on the table to keep from falling. How could she know? How could she be aware of details he himself had tried to forget? "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I want you to stop running," Sophia replied, her eyes locked on his. "Like I had to stop waiting." A heavy silence fell over the office. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping softly against the windows. Nathaniel looked at the girl in front of him, so small and fragile in appearance, yet carrying a weight that seemed greater than the world. "You said your mother went out to buy bread," he began, trying to shift the focus from his own pain. "Why do you think she never came back?" Sophia's face softened, an old sadness clouding her eyes. "For the same reason you drowned yourself in work. Some pains are too heavy to bear alone, but instead of building walls like you, she chose to run and left you alone, like you left them alone." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth and accusation. Nathaniel felt his chest tighten, the memories he had suppressed for so long fighting to surface. I didn't mean to," he murmured, more to himself than to her. There was so much to do, so much to prove. "To whom?" Sophia asked, her voice gentle but firm. "For the market, for the shareholders, or for the boy who grew up hearing he would never be good enough?" Nathaniel felt his defenses crumble. How could that child see through him so clearly? How could she touch wounds so old, so deeply buried? "Tomorrow," she said, walking toward the door. "We'll visit them tomorrow. It's time to face your ghosts, Nathaniel, just like I had to face mine." She left the office, leaving him alone with the weight of her words. Nathaniel sank into his chair, the sound of rain outside blending with the storm of emotions in his chest. In his mind, the memories he had tried to suppress for so long began to surface. The last Christmas that never happened, the unanswered calls, the promised visits that never came to pass. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel Carter let the tears fall, while the rain outside washed over the city as if the sky needed to mourn its own losses. The next morning dawned with hesitant clarity, as if the sun itself was uncertain about that day. Nathaniel had been up since the early hours, his reflection in the mirror showing deep circles from a sleepless night. He dressed mechanically, choosing a black suit he rarely wore, the same one he had worn to funerals. He found Sophia already waiting in the living room, wearing a simple dress Margaret had bought for her. The girl held a small bouquet of white roses, and something about the sight made Nathaniel's heart tighten. "They were her favorite," Sophia said softly. "Your mother always said white roses were like little pieces of peace in the middle of chaos." Nathaniel closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of those words. It was true. His mother had a garden full of white roses, which she tended to herself, even when the illness had already weakened her considerably. The drive to the cemetery was silent. Michael, the driver, occasionally cast worried glances in the rear view mirror but didn't dare break the heavy atmosphere filling the car. When they finally arrived, Nathaniel felt his legs heavy as lead. The cemetery stretched before him, a sea of headstones and monuments under Chicago's gray sky. Sophia took his hand, and her small, firm touch anchored him to reality. "It's this way," she said, guiding him between the graves as if she knew the path by heart. Nathaniel didn't question how she knew. He'd already learned that answers would only bring more questions. They stopped in front of two side-by-side graves, well kept despite his absence. Probably the work of some cemetery employee, paid automatically every month from his bank account. Just another way of outsourcing his emotional responsibilities. Edward Carter, 945, 2020. Beloved husband and father, Eleanor Carter, 1948, 2021, forever in our hearts. Nathaniel felt his legs weaken. There they were, the cold numbers marking the beginning and end of the lives he had neglected in the name of success. Sophia let go of his hand and began carefully arranging the white roses over the two headstones. "Your mother used to say you had your father's eyes," she said, her voice soft as a breeze, "especially when you smiled, but you stopped smiling after he was gone." Tears began streaming down Nathaniel's face before he could stop them. Long suppressed memories flooded his mind. His father trying to teach him to play soccer, his mother making homemade pasta on Sundays, simple moments he had traded for meetings and contracts. "I'm sorry," he whispered, falling to his knees between the graves. "I'm sorry I wasn't here when you needed me." Sophia knelt beside him, her small arms wrapping around his shoulders. "They knew," she said. "They always knew. Your father told your mother you were building your path, even when his heart broke from your absence. And your mother, she kept every article about you, every little mention in newspapers or magazines. It was her way of still being part of your life." Nathaniel sobbed openly now, years of pent-up emotions overflowing at once. How could I? How could I leave them alone? "Sometimes we run from love because we're afraid of losing it," Sophia replied, her voice carrying that ancient wisdom that unsettled him so much. "Like my mother did with me, like you did with them." A gentle wind blew through the cemetery, rustling the petals of the white roses. Nathaniel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his choices, the hollowness of his material achievements against the magnitude of his emotional losses. "It's not too late," Sophia continued, "to honor their memory, to be the person they knew you could be." "How?" he asked, his voice hoarse from crying. "How can I fix something that's hopelessly broken?" "By starting over," she replied simply. "Allowing yourself to feel, allowing yourself to love. They would have wanted that." Nathaniel opened his eyes and looked at the girl beside him. There was something in her gaze, a mix of pain and hope that mirrored his own feelings. How had this abandoned child become his guide through the shadows of his past? "You never told me," he began, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "Why you stayed in that house? Why didn't you seek help when your mother didn't come back?" Sophia's face tightened slightly, a shadow crossing her eyes. "Because sometimes you have to get completely lost to find your way back, like you're doing now." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Nathaniel looked again at his parents' headstones, at the white roses now decorating their graves. Something was shifting inside him, a quiet but profound transformation. "Let's go home," Sophia said, standing and offering him her hand. "There's more you need to face." Nathaniel took her hand and stood, casting one last glance at his parents' graves. The white roses swayed gently in the breeze, as if waving goodbye, or perhaps, see you soon. As they walked back to the car, he realized this visit was only the beginning. There was more pain to confront, more truths to uncover, and somehow, inexplicably, this mysterious little girl would be his guide through this journey of healing and redemption. In the week following the cemetery visit, a subtle change began to unfold in the Carter mansion. The once silent halls now occasionally echoed with the sound of a child's footsteps, and the garden, long merely decorative, began to come alive with Sophia's constant presence among the flowers. Margaret watched these changes with a mix of relief and apprehension. The boss, always so closed off in his world of numbers and business, was now spending more time at home. Sometimes she would catch him watching the girl through the office windows, an indescribable expression on his face. One particularly hot afternoon, While Nathaniel tried to focus on some financial reports, Sophia walked into his office carrying a dusty box that made his heart stop for a moment. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "In the attic," she replied simply, placing the box on his desk. "Behind the old suitcases and the Christmas presents that were never sent." Nathaniel felt his throat tighten. It was the box containing all the family photographs he had banished from the mansion's walls after his parents' death. Memories carefully packed away and hidden, as if the absence of the images could somehow lessen the pain of loss. "We shouldn't be going through this," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just like we shouldn't talk about how you still keep the invitation from the last Christmas your father tried to organize." Sophia opened the box carefully, revealing dozens of photographs. "Or about how your mother kept buying gifts for you until her last day, even though she knew you wouldn't come for them." The words struck him like well-aimed arrows. Nathaniel tried to stand to escape the situation, but his feet seemed rooted to the floor. Sophia began pulling out the photographs one by one, spreading them across his desk like pieces of a puzzle too painful to assemble. "Look," she said, holding up a yellowed photograph. "Your first day of school. Your father had to leave work early and took 3 buses to make it in time to pick you up. He treasured that moment like it was gold." Nathaniel took the photograph with trembling hands. There he was, a skinny little boy with a backpack bigger than himself, gripping his father's hand tightly. Edward Carter, still young and full of dreams, looked at the camera with a smile of pure pride. "How do you know?" "These things," he whispered, his voice choked. "How can you remember details even I had forgotten?" "Because some stories need to be told," she answered, picking up another photograph. "Like this one, from the day your mother tried to teach you how to make gnocchi. The kitchen was a mess, but she said she'd never been happier." The memory hit Nathaniel like a wave. The smell of fresh dough, the crystalline laughter of his mother, flour everywhere, details he had buried so deep he'd nearly lost them forever. "Or this one," continued Sophia, showing a more recent photo. "Your father's last birthday. He waited for you all day, you know. He had prepared that special wine you two shared on important occasions, but you were in Dubai, closing $1 million deal." Nathaniel Carter felt the tears begin to stream down his face. He remembered that day. He had sent a virtual card and promised to make it up next time, but the next time never came. "Why are you doing this to me?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Because some wounds can only heal when we face them head-on," replied Sophia, her eyes locked onto his. "Like how I had to face the emptiness of my home when I realized my mother wasn't coming back." A heavy silence fell over the office. Nathaniel looked at the photographs scattered across his desk, frozen moments in time, fragments of a life he had chosen to ignore in the name of success. "You know what the saddest part is?" Sophia continued, her voice soft but firm. "They never stopped loving you. Even when you didn't answer their calls, even when you cancelled visits at the last minute. Your father kept telling everyone about his brilliant son, and your mother. She would rearrange your room every week as if you could come back at any moment." Nathaniel covered his face with his hands, deep sobs shaking his body. The guilt he had suppressed for so long now overflowed, impossible to contain. "I don't deserve their love," he murmured through tears. "Love isn't about deserving," Sophia replied, placing her small hand on his shoulder. "It's about accepting. Like how I still accept my mother's love even after she's gone. Like how your parents still love you even after they're gone." Nathaniel raised his face, looking at the girl through his tears. There was a wisdom in her eyes that went beyond her years, a deep understanding of pain and love that both frightened and comforted him at the same time. "What should I do now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Start by putting these photographs back on the walls," she replied, picking up a picture where the Carter family smiled together during a Sunday lunch. "Let them tell their stories. Let them remind you of who you were and who you still can be." That afternoon, for the first time in years, Nathaniel Carter allowed his family's memories to inhabit his home once more. And as he and Sophia hung the photographs, each one seemed to whisper long-forgotten stories, weaving back together the threads of a narrative he had tried to erase. The process of redecorating the mansion with the old photographs awakened something in Nathaniel that he hadn't expected, memories that went beyond the images. Every room now seemed to hold echoes of past conversations, forgotten laughter, moments he had buried beneath layers and layers of work and ambition. One Sunday morning, as he sipped his coffee on the porch, a habit he'd developed since Sophia's arrival, he found her sitting on the garden swing, flipping through an old album he didn't recognize. "Where did that come from?" he asked, approaching with his still steaming cup of coffee. "It was hidden behind the last drawer in your office," she replied without looking up. "The one you never opened because it holds your mother's letters from the hospital." Nathaniel felt the coffee turn bitter in his mouth. It was true. The drawer had been stuck for years, and he'd never bothered to fix it. It was easier that way to pretend those letters didn't exist. "This album," Sophia continued, carefully turning a page, "tells a story you've tried to forget, about a boy who dreamed of being a teacher, like his grandfather." The businessman nearly dropped. His cup, how could she know? It was a childhood dream he'd never shared with anyone except— "Your mother kept all your schoolwork," Sophia said, showing yellowed pages filled with childish essays, "especially the one you wrote at 12 about wanting to teach literature to underprivileged children." Nathaniel sank heavily onto the swing beside her. There they were, preserved by time, his youthful words full of hope and idealism. Words she had buried so deep in her heart that she had almost forgotten she had once written them. "What happened to that boy, Nathaniel?" asked Sophia, her voice soft yet piercing. "What made you trade books for spreadsheets, dreams for profits?" "Life happened," he replied, his voice hoarse. "The bills, the responsibilities, the need to prove—" "Prove what?" she interrupted. "And to whom? To the father who only wanted to see you happy? To the mother who kept every little dream of yours as if it were a treasure?" The words struck Nathaniel like physical blows. Memories began to surface. His father, with hands calloused from work, saying he would support any choice. His mother, saving every book he mentioned liking, even when he no longer had time to read. "Do you know what your mother wrote in her last letter?" asked Sophia, closing the album gently. "The one you never opened." Nathaniel felt his heart stop. "No." She said her biggest regret wasn't that you had chosen a different path than the one she dreamed of. It was not being able to show you that you didn't need to prove anything to be loved. Tears began to stream down Nathaniel's face before he could stop them. The weight of that revelation was almost unbearable. "How could you know? What's written in a letter that was never opened?" he whispered between sobs. "Some truths don't need written words," Sophia answered, her eyes meeting his. "They live in the silences, in the choices not made, in the abandoned dreams, like mine." Nathaniel wiped his tears with the back of his hand. "What did you dream of, Sophia?" Before being alone?" A sad smile crossed the girl's face. "I used to dream of having a family that wasn't afraid to love, one that wouldn't run away when the pain became too much to bear." The silence that followed was filled only by the gentle creak of the swing and the birds singing in the garden. Nathaniel looked at the album on Sophia's lap, at the pages that held the dreams of a boy he had left behind. "It's not too late," she said, as if reading his thoughts, "to honor that boy, to become the person he dreamed of being." "How?" asked Nathaniel, his voice barely above a whisper. "Start by opening that drawer," she replied, rising from the swing. "By reading the words your mother left for you. By letting love be stronger than fear." She began walking back to the house, leaving Nathaniel alone with the weight of her words and the album in his lap. The morning sun was already high, casting long shadows across the garden, like fingers from the past pointing toward a future he could still choose. That morning, something shifted inside Nathaniel Carter. It wasn't a grand or dramatic change, but a small awakening, like a long dormant seed finally finding the light. And as he watched Sophia disappear into the house, he realized that perhaps she wasn't just there to help him face his past, but also to show him a different path for his future. The decision to open the drawer didn't come immediately. Nathaniel spent days pacing his office like a caged animal, always stopping in front of the old piece of furniture, only to retreat again. Margaret watched his growing restlessness with concern, while Sophia kept a respectful distance, as if she knew some battles had to be fought alone. It was on a particularly difficult night, after a nightmare left him drenched in sweat, that he finally found the courage. The clock read 3:47 a.m. when he entered his office, turning on only the lamp that cast ghostly shadows on the walls. The drawer was stuck, as it always had been. Nathaniel pulled hard, feeling the old wood resist. When it finally gave way, the scent of aged paper and stored memories filled his nostrils. "You're not alone," Sophia's voice came from the doorway, startling him. She stood there, a small figure in a white nightgown, looking almost ethereal in the dim light. "How did you know I'd be here?" "Because some nights are heavier than others," she replied, stepping closer. "Like the last night your mother spent in the hospital, when you were closing that deal in London." Nathaniel felt his legs weaken. He sank heavily into his chair, staring at the stack of yellowed letters now resting on his desk. "I should have been there," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes," Sophia agreed softly. "Just as I should have sought help when I realized my mother wouldn't return. But we can't change the past, Nathaniel. We can only learn from it." With trembling hands, he picked up the first letter. The envelope was sealed, like all the others. His mother had kept writing even when he didn't reply, even when his visits grew fewer and farther between. "She wrote every night," Sophia said, sitting in the chair across from the desk. "Even when the medication left her confused, even when the pain was nearly unbearable, it was her way of keeping you close." Nathaniel carefully opened the first envelope, as if handling something precious and fragile. His mother's handwriting, usually so steady and elegant, showed signs of the tremors caused by her illness. "My dear son," he began reading aloud, his voice faltering on the first words. "Today the doctor said, the treatment isn't working as we'd hoped. But don't worry, I'm not writing to make you feel guilty. I'm writing because there are things a mother needs to say to her son, even if he's too busy to listen." Tears blurred his vision, but he kept reading. "I remember when you were little and so afraid of thunderstorms. Your father always said you were too brave to fear something so natural, but I knew the truth. You weren't afraid of the thunder. You were afraid of seeming weak. Even as a child you carried this weight of needing to be strong, of needing to prove your worth." Nathaniel had to pause for a moment, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the paper. Sophia remained silent, her presence a quiet anchor, in his moment of vulnerability. "Life is funny, my son," he continued reading. "We spend so much time building walls to protect ourselves that we forget how to live without them. You've built your empire, claimed your place in the sun, but at what cost? How many hugs did you fail to give? How many moments did you let slip by?" "Go on," whispered Sophia when he hesitated. She needed you to hear this. "I'm not angry with you, my love. I never was. I just wanted you to understand that success isn't measured only by numbers in a bank account. It's measured by the smiles you share, the hearts you touch, the love you allow into your life." Nathaniel was openly sobbing now, his mother's words echoing in his heart like long silent bells. "And my final wish, my dear son, isn't for you to regret the choices you've made. It's for you to find the courage to make new ones, to learn to be vulnerable again, to let love into your life even when it hurts, even when it scares you. Because in the end, it's the bonds we create that keep us truly alive." The letter ended with a shaky signature and a small smudge, probably a tear his mother had shed as she wrote. "There's more," said Sophia, pointing to the other envelopes. "Each one tells a story, holds a piece of her heart. Like the stories my mother never had the courage to tell me." Nathaniel looked at the stack of unopened letters, each one a testament to his mother's unconditional love, each one a chance at redemption he had ignored for so long. "Why are you here, Sophia?" he asked, finally voicing the question that had haunted him since day one. "Why are you helping me face all this?" The girl smiled, a sad and wise smile that seemed out of place on her youthful face. "Because sometimes we need to lose ourselves completely to find our way back. And maybe, just maybe, by helping you find your way, I can find mine too. The following weeks brought a new routine to the Carter mansion. Nathaniel spent his nights reading his mother's letters, one by one, letting each word seep into his heart like raindrops on parched earth. During the day, between meetings and appointments that now felt less urgent, he caught himself watching Sophia with a mix of fascination and growing unease. The girl had developed a habit of sitting in the garden, especially near the white roses that so closely resembled Eleanor Carter's favorites. One afternoon, as he watched her from his office window, Nathaniel noticed something different in her behavior. She seemed more distant, almost translucent under the light of the setting sun. "Something feels different," remarked Margaret, who had entered quietly with a cup of coffee. "The girl. She seems more sad," Nathaniel finished, taking the cup without looking away from the window, "as if she's saying goodbye." The words left his mouth before he could think them through, and a shiver ran down his spine as he realized their meaning. Leaving the coffee untouched on the table, he walked out into the garden. Sophia didn't move as he approached, her eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the rose bushes. He sat beside her on the wooden bench his father had built decades ago. "You're leaving, aren't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some stories must end so others can begin," she replied, her voice carrying that maturity that always unsettled him. "Like your mother's letters, like the dreams you've held on to for so long." Nathaniel felt his heart tighten. "But why? Why now?" "Because you don't need me the same way anymore," she turned to face him, her eyes gleaming with an ancient wisdom. "You're finally learning to face your wounds without fearing the bleed." "But what about you? Your story? Your mother?" "My story is like your unread letters," she interrupted gently. "Sometimes we must let them go to move forward." A heavy silence fell over the garden. The sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Nathaniel of the watercolors his mother used to paint. "Do you know why I stayed in that house for so long?" Sophia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't just because Mama asked me to wait. It was because I was afraid to discover that if I left, there would be no place to go." Nathaniel felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. "You'll always have a place here," he said, his voice choked. "Just like your parents always had a place in your heart, even when you tried to pretend they didn't," she replied, a sad smile playing on her lips. "But sometimes love means letting go. You sound like her," murmured Nathaniel, "like my mother in her last letters." "Because some truths are universal," said Sophia, rising from the bench. "Like the love your parents had for you, even when you couldn't see it. Like the love my mother had for me, even when fear made her leave." Nathaniel also stood, feeling a sudden urgency to stop her from walking away. "But there's still so much I need to understand, so much I need to know." "No," she gently interrupted. "What you need is already inside you, in the memories you finally allowed to resurface, in the words your mother left for you, in the love you're learning to feel again." The sun had nearly disappeared on the horizon now, and the shadows in the garden stretched like dark fingers reaching into the twilight. Sophia seemed almost ethereal in the fading light, as if she were beginning to vanish before his eyes. "How am I supposed to move forward without you?" he asked, feeling once more like that frightened boy who feared thunderstorms. "The same way I learned to move forward without Mom," she replied, her smile softer now. "One day at a time, one memory at a time, one love at a time." Nathaniel reached out to touch her, but something held him back. There was a growing distance between them, not physical but of another kind, as if Sophia were already beginning her departure, even as she stood there. "Tomorrow," she said, starting to walk toward the house. "There's one last thing I need to show you, one last truth that needs to be revealed." And as he watched her disappear into the growing twilight, Nathaniel Carter felt he was on the brink of a revelation that would change everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and redemption. The garden around him seemed to whisper secrets he wasn't yet ready to understand, while the white roses swayed gently in the night breeze, like silent sentinels guarding truths still hidden. The night that followed was the longest Nathaniel could remember since his parents' death. Lying in bed, unable to sleep, he listened to the sounds of the big empty house, every creak and whisper seeming to carry messages he couldn't decipher. Dawn found him already on his feet, the dark circles under his eyes betraying his sleepless night. Margaret, as she served breakfast, noticed he barely touched his food, his gaze constantly drifting toward the stairs, waiting for Sophia to come down. When the girl finally appeared, there was something different about her presence. She wore the same simple dress as the day he'd found her, her small hands clutching a yellowed envelope that made Nathaniel's heart leap. "What is this?" he asked, his voice rough with apprehension. "The last letter," she replied, simply. "Not from your mother, from mine." For a moment, Nathaniel felt the world spin. "Your mother left a letter." "In the house where you found me," Sophia said, stepping closer to the table. "In the same place she left me a long time ago." With trembling hands, Nathaniel took the envelope she offered. It was sealed, just as his own mother's letters had been, guarding truths he feared to uncover. "Read it," Sophia urged, her voice soft but firm. "It's time for you to understand." Nathaniel carefully opened the envelope, feeling the fragile paper beneath his fingers. The handwriting was delicate, though the words seemed hurried, some smudged by tears long. "Since dried, my dearest daughter," he began to read aloud, his voice shaking slightly. "If you're reading this letter, it means I have failed in the most terrible way a mother can fail. It means fear was stronger than love, that pain was greater than courage." He paused, looking up at Sophia, who stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the written words. "Keep going," she whispered. "You need to know. You asked so often about your father," he continued reading, "about why he was never present in our lives. The truth, my love, is that he never knew about you. When I found out I was pregnant, he had already left. Not by his choice, but because life is sometimes too cruel to those who love too much." Nathaniel felt his throat tighten, the next words seeming to leap off the page. "Your father was a good man, a teacher who believed he could change the world through education. Nathaniel Carter was his name, and he never knew that the love we shared that brief summer resulted in the greatest gift anyone could receive." The world seemed to stop. Nathaniel lifted his eyes from the paper, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. Sophia watched him with a mix of sadness and understanding that now made perfect sense. You are your daughter," she finished softly. "The daughter you never knew you had. The child born from the love between you and Olivia Bennett, the substitute teacher you met that summer, before your big trip to London, before you became the businessman you are today." Memories flooded his mind. Olivia with her big eyes and gentle smile, the afternoons spent talking about literature and dreams, the last kiss before his departure. He had never seen her again after that summer, consumed by his pursuit of success and recognition. "Why did she never tell me?" he whispered, tears streaming freely down his face. "Keep reading," Sophia replied, her voice heavy with an old sorrow. "When I finally gathered the courage to look for you," he continued reading, "you were already a different man. The newspapers talked about the promising young entrepreneur, the business genius building an empire. How could I, a simple teacher, show up with a child and possibly destroy everything you had achieved?" Nathaniel could barely see the words through his tears, but he pressed on. "So I did what I thought was best. I raised our daughter alone, loving her for both of us. But the illness that took my parents came for me too, and now fear is greater than my strength. Sophia has your eyes, did you know? And your heart, even if you've hidden yours for so long." The letter trembled in his hands, the last words nearly illegible. "Forgive me, my daughter, for not being strong enough. Forgive me, Nathaniel, for not having the courage to tell the truth. And may one day, somehow, you find each other and heal the wounds that time and fear have opened in your hearts." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning and revelations. Nathaniel looked at Sophia, his daughter, as if seeing her for the first time. All the signs were there, the inexplicable knowledge about his life, the deep connection he had. Felt from the very first moment the way she seemed to understand his deepest pains. "That's how you knew," he murmured. "That's how you could see right through me." "Because I am part of you," she replied softly. "The part you lost when you chose to walk away from who you truly were. The part your mother tried to remind you of in her letters." Nathaniel stood up, staggering under the weight of the revelation. His entire life, all his choices seemed different now, seen through the lens of this newly discovered truth. The impact of the revelation hit Nathaniel like a sudden storm, leaving him stunned and disoriented. For hours he wandered the halls of the mansion, his entire world reshaped by this single truth. He had a daughter who in some inexplicable way had found her way to him when he needed it most. Margaret watched from a distance, worried about his state but not daring to interfere. Sophia remained in the garden, among the white roses, as if patiently waiting for him to process everything he had just discovered. As the sun began to set, painting Chicago's sky in shades of purple and gold, Nathaniel finally found the strength to join her. "How?" was all he managed to ask, his voice hoarse from crying. "Some things cannot be explained," Sophia replied, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Like a mother's love that chooses to leave to protect her child, or a father's love that must lose everything to find what truly matters." "Olivia." The name left his lips like a prayer. "Is she?" "She passed 3 months ago," Sophia said gently. "The same cancer that took your parents. She fought as hard as she could, but in the end..." Nathaniel felt his legs weaken and sat on the bench beside her. Memories of that summer, long buried under layers of ambition and business, began to resurface. Olivia's smile, their conversations about literature, the dreams they had shared. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he asked, his voice choked. "Because some truths can only be revealed when we're ready to receive them," she answered, "like your mother's letters, like the dreams you've held onto for so long." A heavy silence fell between them, filled only by the soft rustling of leaves and the distant songs of birds returning to their nests. "What happens now?" asked Nathaniel, feeling more lost than ever. "Now," said Sophia, turning to face him, "you have a choice to make. You can keep being the successful businessman who built walls around his heart, or you can be the man your mother always knew you. I could be the father I always knew you were." The words hit him hard. He remembered his mother's letters, her last wish for him to find the courage to make new choices. "But how can I be a father?" he whispered. "How can I fix so many lost years?" "The same way you're learning to be a son again," she replied. "One day at a time, one memory at a time, one love at a time." Nathaniel looked at that girl, his daughter, and saw in her not just Olivia's features, but something of himself too. The same determination in her eyes, the same ability to see beyond appearances. "You knew from the beginning," he said, "not a question. That's why you could see right through me. That's why you knew so many details about my life." "Mom told me stories about you," Sophia confessed. "Not the stories from the newspapers about the successful businessman, but the stories of the man who dreamed of being a teacher, who loved literature, who had a heart bigger than he could bear." Tears welled in Nathaniel's eyes again, but this time they were different. Not tears of regret or guilt, but of recognition, of a long-denied truth. "When you said you had to leave," he began, a new fear forming in his heart. "Not that kind of leaving," she gently interrupted. "No more. Now that you know the truth, now that you're ready to be who you really are, I can stay, if you want." "If I want?" Nathaniel let out a choked laugh. "How could I not want? You're my daughter." The words came naturally, as if his heart had known them long before his mind accepted the truth. "Yes," she smiled, and for the first time her smile was truly childlike, without that ancient wisdom that had so intrigued him. "I am." The sun had nearly disappeared on the horizon now, but for Nathaniel it felt like a new light was beginning to dawn, a light that came not from the sky but from within him, illuminating dark corners he had long forgotten existed. "Let's go home," he said, reaching out his hand to his daughter. "We have a lot of time to make up for." Sophia took his hand, and together they walked back to the mansion. But now it was no longer just a big, empty house. It was the beginning of a home, a place where the photographs on the walls were no longer just painful memories but promises of new ones yet to be made. And as they climbed the porch steps, Nathaniel realized that some stories don't end with an ending, but with a new beginning. His was just starting. A year had passed since that night in the garden, and the Carter mansion had transformed completely. The once austere walls now displayed not just old family photographs, but new ones too. Sophia on her first day at her new school, father and daughter sharing an ice cream in the park. Simple moments that carried the precious weight of newfound happiness. On a particularly sunny Saturday morning, Nathaniel woke to the sound of laughter coming from the garden. He found Sophia sitting among the white roses, which now bloomed with renewed vigor, as if they too were celebrating the new life pulsing through that house. "Good morning, Dad," she smiled, and even after a year, that word still made his heart leap. "Good morning, my little one," he replied, sitting beside her on the bench, now well cared for, its old planks replaced with new ones, but still holding the essence his own father had created. Sophia held a book in her lap, a collection of poetry that had belonged to Olivia. Nathaniel recognized the worn cover, the pages marked with little colorful sticky notes, each holding a thought, a memory. "You know," she began, her voice soft in the quiet morning, "Mom always said you had a gift for teaching, that your eyes lit up when you talked about literature." Nathaniel smiled, remembering the project he had started a few months ago, an educational foundation in memory of Olivia, offering scholarships to young teachers. It was a way to honor not only her memory, but also his own forgotten dreams. "And she was right, as always," Sophia continued, closing the book delicately. "The students at the foundation love your literature classes." It was true. Twice a week, Nathaniel left his corporate empire in the capable hands of his directors to volunteer as a teacher at the foundation. It was a return to his roots, a way to reconcile with the boy who once dreamed of being a teacher. "You look so much like her," he said, watching his daughter's profile against the morning light. "Not just physically, but in the way you see the world, how you understand people." "And like you too," she replied, turning to face him. "The determination, the strength to face hard truths, even when it hurts." Nathaniel took her small hand, in his feeling the connection that now felt as natural as breathing. "You saved me, you know, when you found me in that house." "No," she gently interrupted. "You saved yourself. I just showed you the way, like Mom would have if she'd had the chance." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with the hum of bees among the flowers and the songs of birds in the trees. The mansion behind them was no longer a monument to loneliness, but a true home where laughter echoed through the halls and love flowed freely. "Want to know a secret?" Sophia asked, a playful smile on her lips. "Always," he replied, realizing how much that word had changed in meaning over the past year. "Grandma Eleanor is proud of you," she said, her eyes shining with a wisdom he now understood was a legacy from two extraordinary women, Olivia and his own mother. Her and Grandpa Edward, they see how you've changed, how you finally let your heart open. Nathaniel felt tears forming in his eyes but didn't try to hold them back. He'd learned that some tears were just love overflowing. "And Olivia?" he asked softly. "Do you think she—" "She always knew this day would come," Sophia added. "That's why she gave me the strength to wait, to believe that love would be stronger than fear." Nathaniel looked around the garden, at the house now pulsing with life, at his daughter who had brought light into his existence. All the losses, all the pain he had endured seemed part of a greater plan, a winding but necessary path that had led him exactly where he needed to be. "You know what else Mom used to say?" Sophia continued, opening the poetry book again. "That sometimes we need to get completely lost to find ourselves. That sometimes love has to take the longest route to reach its destination." And she was right, Nathaniel smiled, realizing how those words echoed all the lessons he had learned over the past year. As always, the sun rose in the sky, promising another bright day. Inside the house, Margaret was preparing breakfast. The scent of fresh bread and coffee filling the air, life moved forward, but now with renewed purpose, a clear direction. "Let's have breakfast," Nathaniel said, standing and offering his hand to his daughter. "Afterward, we can work a bit on the community library project you suggested." Sophia took his hand, her eyes shining with the same light he now recognized in himself, the light of love found, of wounds healed, of dreams reborn. Together they walked back to the house, leaving behind the garden bench where so many truths had been revealed. The white roses swayed gently in the morning breeze, silent witnesses to a story of loss, love, and redemption. And so, the story of Nathaniel and Sophia continued, no longer a tale of pain and absence, but a testament to the transformative power of love, the love of a mother who left too soon, the love of a daughter who never gave up, and the love of a man who had finally learned to open his heart to all the possibilities life had to offer.